Okay, there we
Got it.
go. All right. Hello, Alex. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I'm
Thanks
so
for
glad that
having
you're
me.
here. I know this is exciting. You're the very first guest, and I picked you for a reason because I think you're so
Really?
amazing. Yes. Oh,
I'm so honored. I didn't know that.
yep, the very first guest. So this is super exciting. So why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then we'll start in with the questions.
My armpits got spicy. I don't like this question. I don't know why. Okay, well, I guess I'll start with the most relevant information since I know that your audience is a lot of EMS women. I am, at one point was one of you. I worked in EMS, primarily private ambulance, and sometime with the fire department for about 15 years. 2003 was when I got started. And somewhere about 15, 16 years, I had a severe back injury. Tear your backs. We can talk about that at some point. And that kind of wiped me out of my active role as a paramedic, which was devastating at the time. Luckily, I had started teaching. I had started teaching a few years prior, was working with an EMS academy, working with EMT students, paramedic students pretty extensively. And my life kind of took a direction there. I mean, kind of one of those things where I could no longer do. So I taught and I enjoyed it at the time. I still enjoy it actually, but I enjoyed it so much that it was really my one saving grace when I couldn't do it anymore. Because I started when I was 18. So it was my whole identity. Really, I didn't have I didn't have a very balanced relationship with myself and my work. And I turned to school thinking that, okay, well, I need to have some more education, I thought at the time. And I still believe that the path I took, I needed it, but I don't think everybody needs it. And so I finished my bachelor's. I got injured at the end of my bachelor's program. I finished my master's.
Wow.
I had a wild hair up my ass and I decided to go for my PhD. And I am going to graduate in May at this rate. I'm on track to graduate in May. So I just finished up. I'm finishing up a 4.5-year program. Wow. I just spent 2 years researching my dissertation, completing it, writing it. And right now it's going through, the process to become approved. As far as what I do now, I own my own business, Emergency Resilience, which is essentially an educational platform. My goal is to create more CE programs, CE courses. I have one in particular that some people might have heard of if they're familiar with my work, and that's Death Communication, which is a death notification CE course. I have more that I've taught. They've just mostly been locally in person over the last few years at conferences. I have intentions of creating more. It's just I had to kind of compartmentalize and kind of go, okay, well, I created this thing. It took me a year. After teaching it in person for a few years, but I created this product and now I have to kind of shelf that work so that I can finish school if I'm going to finish on time. And now that we're kind of coming to an end, I'm excited to get back in the studio and create more. And my goal is really just to create CE courses that don't suck, that challenge the norm, that challenge what we have been, I guess, what we've had to pick from. And I want to kind of dive into some marginalized topics, things that maybe aren't as easy to talk about. That's where death notifications came into play. I love topics like the Lazarus phenomenon, lucid CPR, conscious awareness during CPR are some big ones, grief in the first responder, psychedelic therapy for PTSD, all of those things. And being a CE provider and having an educational board and a medical director that I can go to and say, hey, am I allowed to give a CE for this topic? And they can tell me yes or no. They can kind of be those checks and balances. Of course, being CAPC accredited, everything has to go through them too. But my goal is to really push the envelope. And I think it's important to have those bread and butter CE courses that we've all needed and that we could all use a refresher from after getting done with, EMT, medic, nursing school, whatever. But there's a lot of emerging topics, a lot of things that just we don't have clear direction on, we don't have clear answers on, but they're still worth knowing about. And that's kind of where I found myself working, is in this space.
I love that. I think that's what has attracted me towards you and your work, that you are offering something that we don't see other places. And I as well like to talk about topics that aren't mainstream for our areas of expertise, right? I like to talk about the well-being aspect
Yes, yes.
of us. I like to talk about sexual harassment. It's a
Mhm.
very unpopular topic,
It
but it
is.
needs to be talked about because listen, it's still happening. It's the year
Mhm.
2023 and women still can't really show up at work without, getting harassed. And that's got
Mhm.
to stop.
Mhm.
It's got to stop. And it starts with education. And so I love talking about those topics that are less mainstream. I mean, you can find vent and labs and cardiac stuff everywhere, like
Everywhere. And they're
everywhere.
necessary. We
Yeah,
need them.
absolutely.
I'm not shaming them whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's just, and especially uh those of us who have lived those experiences are the ones that are going to be able to carry that message a little further. So I think that's
Yeah.
what drives our passions to the directions that we fall into. And I
Yeah.
think that's what makes it, it just delivers that message in a unique way that someone from a third party perspective cannot
Right. Yeah.
deliver. And
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I love the idea that it's just crazy to me, first of all, that we don't teach paramedic students, EMTs, even nurses, probably even doctors, for all I know, like how to actually communicate that somebody has died. Until you've actually experienced somebody close to you dying, or you have a friend that had a death at home and EMS got there, they remember those things. They might not remember that we gave epi and shocked him and all of this. They're going to remember that face-to-face conversation when somebody told them that they have died. Now, I've been doing this job for a really long time, and I have seen very bad ways that people have been told that their loved one has died. And I'm usually the first one that's like, I will go talk to the family. Please. Like, I feel like I have a better grasp on how to do that, being through the experience myself. And so I love
Mhm.
that you're teaching that. Big fan of your work. So let me start with this first question. What was your experience like working as a woman in EMS?
Oh, it's so funny you asked that because I was thinking that when you started talking about it, I was like, I know some of the topics that you've discussed. I love the conversations that you've bridged, especially in our EMS group on Facebook. And I've since we had our little meeting about kind of our pre-meeting for this podcast, I was thinking about my experience as a woman in EMS. And here's my disclaimer with what I'm about to say is I have had a very positive experience as a woman.
Nice.
I've
I
had a
love
very
that.
positive experience. The experiences that other women have had being negative, harmful, unsafe, degrading does not make my experience any less true, just like the inverse
Yes.
doesn't. My good experience does not mean they didn't have their bad one.
I love that you said that. That is so important because people would automatically be like, well, she doesn't know. She didn't have a real experience.
Yeah.
I love that you had a positive experience. I think that that's absolutely amazing. And you know what? As somebody who's had kind of a more tumultuous experience, because I feel so secure in myself and my knowledge of what I went through, I don't feel any negativity towards you
Mhm.
whatsoever because you had a positive experience. As a matter of fact, I'm so happy for you because I think it's great. I think it's good that other people can see that you can be in this industry and not
Mhm.
have a terrible experience. Like as a young girl listening or whatever, hearing this possibly, like there is good places. There is,
There are.
there are
There
good
are.
places to work. Yeah.
There are, and I think it has a lot more to do with the people I was surrounded by than it did me. Because to say, oh well, you to say that I did something different to create an effect that others around me had control over would it would just, I don't know, there's something wrong with that doesn't sit with me well, because it's like the opposite of victim shaming. It's saying, oh, well, you did something right. And it's like, no, I think I got fortunate. I got lucky. I was surrounded by very good men. Granted, as an 18-year-old, completely inexperienced, both with my industry and with the male population, it would have been really nice to get some, just some big sister advice to even know what to ask. But, I've had a couple boyfriends in this field, and I'm very lucky that they were good men. I was occupied with, 4 or 5 year relationships. And I mean, there's only one that I can think of that didn't last very long that I would screw that guy. I don't even admit that I ever knew that person, but the rest of them were good men that I would never, they were just good people that I occupied my time with. And I think, I don't know if maybe that made me less of a, quote unquote target, at least for flirtatious advances, but then for harassment and discrimination, I genuinely think I was treated, if anything, I was treated better being a woman. I remember wanting to be a firefighter when I was very young, and men trying to get my equipment for me and me wanting to do it because, I had to prove myself, and them being like, oh, nice work. Like, they wouldn't give a shit if my male partner picked up a gurney, if they picked up a sloppy patient. They wouldn't give them any props for that, but they gave me it. And then I remember, years later, I think I was 8-9 years in when I finally became a paramedic, and I came back to the area I used to work because I had left the county for a while. And I was running with people that were familiar, and they go and try and grab my bag for me, or they go try and grab my gurney. I was like, thanks. Like, I don't have the same benefits as you, and I don't have full-time insurance. So, thanks, buddy. Appreciate it. So I'd use it to my advantage. So yeah, was I treated differently? Yes, I was.
Yeah.
Did I think it was to my advantage? Yes, I did. Did it bother me when people tried to hold my door for me or pick something up for me or do it? Nope, it didn't. I mean, it did for a minute when I was like, trying to make sure that I, did my part, or like appeared like I could be fit for the same job. Sure. Yeah. But that wasn't anything that, there was no distress there when it came to my work experience. And I was trying to think of there was one person that I can think of that I absolutely hated working with. And to a degree, I think I sometimes felt like I got treated differently because I was a woman, and the way he treated the other women. This was in an office setting, and the way he treated the other women in the office. But when I look back on it, he was a dick to everybody. Yeah. He did not discriminate, honestly. It didn't matter what uniform they wore. It didn't matter if they had a rank on him. He would undermine anybody. Yeah. And so I think it was, I can genuinely say I had a good experience as a woman in this field. And I continue to this day, as far as my male counterparts that I interact with.
I love that. I think that's a good positive spin on the industry, because I don't think we hear a lot of that. I think maybe there's some why women who've had good experiences don't speak out about it, because they don't want to take away, or, from maybe the women that had bad experiences, like you said.
And what's there to learn from? Like, what's there to learn from my experience other than, oh, it exists? Because I never want someone, and I feel like you and I in this space, I already feel comfortable enough just answering this way, because I know you're not taking it as I'm minimizing what your experience was. Right. Yeah. Or I'm minimizing what anybody else's experience was. It just was an experience. And that's what it is for me.
And, like you said, it wasn't because of you individually, just like I wasn't harassed and treated poorly because I was deserving in some way. It had everything to do with all the people that were around me. And I just happened to, get unlucky. And so my other question for you is, were there other women that worked in that area, and how was your interaction with other women? I think we get kind of a bad rap that like some girls can be mean girls. There's like this weird competition. And so what's your experience with that?
I did not have, there were not a lot of women I worked with, but the ones that I did, great experiences with. I'm friends with some of them to this day. Awesome. Some of them I get to continue working with and teaching with, highly respect, highly admire. And I think that can be true, but I think it's also driven by this societal like stigma, because it makes really good TV.
Mhm.
And I don't know if I was just actually thinking about this last night. I was rewatching, I'm rewatching Ted Lasso right now because I'm
I love
obsessed with Ted
Oh,
Lasso. And so
good.
tell me if you've noticed this, because, and I don't want to give too much away for anybody who hasn't had the absolute pleasure of watching this show. But the women in there's some toxic examples in the beginning, earlier stages with Rebecca, but the women in there are praising each other, even to the point when I remember when Keely sees that her date, what's his name, brings another girl. She doesn't go up to her and start snarking off to her. She goes, "Hey,
Right.
nice to meet you. May I have a moment with him?" She doesn't take it out on her. Even when she
Right.
walks into the house and they'd just broken up and he's already got a new girl there, that girl is like, "Oh my God, I see all your Instagram stories." And she's like totally fangirling over her. And she goes, "Oh, thank you." And then she turns her attention back to who deserves the shit. And that's him.
Right.
Right.
Mhm.
And I just thought that is such a cool spin on not doing what's easy to do, which is to be, throwing shade at the other woman.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, this is the whole reason why I created the All EMS Women Facebook group, is because it's like, listen, the power is when we support each other in the community that we create. I didn't have that. And so I wanted to create that, because having other women in your corner cheering you on and it not taking anything away from them and their accomplishments
Mm-hmm.
feels amazing.
It really does. It really does. And so I had a lot of male friends, but and it was easy to be. I mean, I worked in a firehouse with. It was the ambulance, 4-man engine, 4-man truck, battalion chief. I mean, everyone in there was a male. And so the one female that was at the neighboring station, I mean, her and I are still friends to this day.
That's
We're going to see
awesome.
each other in a couple months. And so when the male friends in my life, especially post paramedic school, there was a group of like 6 of us guys, or 6 of them guys, and I would hang out with them. When they started getting girlfriends, I was like, yes. And especially when they got good girlfriends.
Right.
I was stoked. And then I started doing this, like, once everybody had a girlfriend, I started doing this thing. Well, why don't we do a wine night and we do something away from the boys?
Sure.
And one of my guy friends was like, thank you. Like, thank you for
Yes.
being initiating that, because you just made our lives so much easier. Having previous poor experiences with
Sure.
women getting along. And I mean, those guys and their wives now are still some of my closest friends these days. I was in their weddings. I was there when their kids were born. I work with them today on special contracts that I have with some fire departments. And I'm very, very, very grateful
That's
for
amazing.
those relationships.
Now, did you have any experience with, speaking of the wives or girlfriends, like them being jealous? Like, I know that that's a tendency of some girls to get a little protective of their firefighters, and knowing that you guys are sleeping in the same station.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how did you overcome that? Or what advice would you have, for girls working in, or women fire departments, like how to manage the women at home of the guys?
So it helped that I have a boy's name. Honestly, truthfully, it helped that I was Alex, because
Sure.
it's so funny, because I saw this TikTok about using pronouns and how men sure know how to use they and them when they're talking about a woman in front of her girlfriend. And my boyfriend starts laughing so hard. I was like, you guys do that shit. You absolutely do that stuff. And so, yeah, anyways, I did have a couple of cases of those where I was on some paramedics' do not work with list because their wives. But you know what? I didn't take it personally. And one of them said, "I'm not allowed to work with you anymore. My wife just doesn't know you." And I was like, that's fine. I said, you respect your wife and you respect your relationship more than some person you work with occasionally.
Right.
And it felt weird at first. I'm like 19 years old going like, okay, not
Right.
understanding the dynamics of what a marriage actually is, and
Right.
what their history might be, and what her history with other women in that profession might be, in the company that I worked for. And so, yeah, that did happen. But I do think that going by Alex definitely helped.
That's a good one. The pronoun thing is actually really hilarious.
It's hysterical.
Now that you think about it. Okay, that's amazing. I love that. I love your experience. So then the last couple episodes of the podcast that I've been talking about is exceptional self-care. I like to call it, instead of just regular self-care, like exceptional care. In this industry, because of the job we do and the hours and all of this, we do have to find a way to take really good care of ourselves when we're not on duty. I mean, we have to when we're on duty, but it's easier, I feel like, because we're more aware of ourselves when we're on duty. I don't know. I just feel like we do a better job. So when we come home, things can maybe spiral out a little bit. And so I'm curious, like what kind of things you do to balance your life. I know that you're not, not actually, but you're not working currently as a paramedic. You're busy doing a million other things, but like, there's still that, I don't want to say balance either. There's still that trade-off, working hard and then taking care of ourselves. Why don't you talk a little bit? Of course, I do know some of the things that you do, but the audience doesn't have any idea. So let's talk about that.
Well, I would say what I do now is just different. In some ways, I think when I know what I did when I was working in the field on an ambulance was hard. It's rough work. I mean, it's very rough work. I do my best not to forget how difficult that was, because I know that the longer I'm outside of that field, the more at a disadvantage I am to speak to it. And so that's why I love having these conversations with people who are still in the field, because at least I can stay curious, and at least I can still keep my pulse on it to my best knowledge. I think just acknowledging that I no longer have that personal connection is an advantage in its own. And right now my role is I'm actually an EMS coordinator, part-time, very part-time.
Okay.
I'm an EMS coordinator, so that keeps me somewhat in touch with what my firefighters are seeing. So that's really, really beneficial. But one thing, and this really started with COVID, I left my full-time job as an EMS coordinator. I was working for a very large fire department as EMS coordinator. EMS specialist is what they call them. And I there was several of us in that office space. And I left that job at the end of 2019, right before COVID happened. A couple months later, and I was actually applying. I had applications in everywhere. I'd finally gotten the green light about like 3 years later after my back injury to go back into the field.
Oh.
I actually did get cleared back into the field. I had applied everywhere. And then when COVID hit, I thought, oh, global pandemic, someone's going to hire me.
Right.
No, nobody hired me. The area I lived in California was not hit the way places like New York were.
Oh,
and so I think that was the huge polarity that a lot of people couldn't understand, is that yes, you could have hospitals that were bare, that had no patients, almost no patients. You could have systems that were bored, that were comfortable saying it's been quiet for days. We're bored. Saying it out loud.
Right.
Okay, I'm not even kidding, because that's how, for lack of a better word, that's how dead it was.
Yeah.
Nobody was calling 911. And at the same time, you could have places that were like literally having the apocalypse happen.
Yeah.
One did not erase the other from being true. So I couldn't get a job in the field. Nobody was hiring. They were laying off people.
Oh my God.
And suddenly we weren't, and at the same token, we weren't teaching in person anymore. So everything was online. Everything was online. People were calling meetings on a Sunday in the middle of the afternoon. Suddenly I was no longer in school in person. I couldn't go to school like I did once. I was not online for my doctorate. I was in person and couldn't go to school. So everything was taking place in my living room. My downtime, my after work time, my before work time, my during work time, my lunch time, my school time, my study time. And there was just no separation whatsoever. No. And I am still trying to find a balance and compartmentalize where those things all go, because I never fully went back to working a 9 to 5 after that. I continued to build my business. I actually launched my business in January of 2020. I signed a contract to produce my my online course in February of 2020. And then in March of 2020, I thought, oh shit, did I make the biggest mistake of my life?
No, you did not.
I didn't, but I could not see past
the
crisis that we were experiencing to understand that this was going to be more necessary than ever.
Yeah.
Couldn't see it.
Wow.
And so to answer your bigger question, I would say now, yes, my life is I am traveling probably twice a month,
Okay.
out of state, going to whatever contract or speaking engagement or training that I've been hired to do. Very, very grateful for those opportunities. So it's a different kind of hard because
Yeah.
I don't eat well when I travel. I don't keep up my workout routine, which is weak at best when I'm home when I travel.
Right.
But I think little things that I can do, and I'm actually doing it right now. Um, I put my phone on silence.
Mm,
I turn off notifications.
yeah.
I unsubscribe to every single email that doesn't, it's just noise. I am learning, at least in the last few months I've been doing that part. I am learning to reduce the noise.
Yes.
That's not necessary. I have gone through, especially TikTok can be very like volatile.
Yeah.
Um, if there's any polarizing topic, I will go into the settings and I will block and mute certain words.
That is amazing. I did not, when you said that the last time we talked, I was like, wait a minute, what?
Mhm.
I got to get that figured out. It
And
sounds
it
like
doesn't
what,
matter if I'm for it or not. If
oh,
it's a
that's
polarizing
wild.
topic, I will completely block it because it's a person who's delivering the message. I can have a very uh, interesting conversation about a topic that I don't agree with somebody, or
Yeah.
but because of the person, I can learn something from them. They can learn something from me. If it's a complete stranger on the internet and they're being completely vile to one another, I don't want to see it. You're
Right.
blocked. You're muted. I don't care. And I just literally will mute all these words because I have a problem with censorship, but
Mm,
not with self-censorship. We have to remember there's a difference between it.
mm, right. Wow. That's profound right
There's
there.
there's so much power in it. And
Yeah.
just not interested, not interested, not interested. There's a feature on TikTok as well. It learns your algorithm very well. I'm totally one of those scroll hole people. Like that is how it's a very maladaptive coping mechanism. Just sit there and scroll. It can be very entertaining too.
Yes.
But I'll get lost on there for
Yeah.
hours. I'll miss a sleep train and then I'm up late and it's not healthy. But I will literally, if something gets too dark or too doomsday, too stressful, too even like, conspiracy theories can be fun sometimes, but I just go, I can't, I don't have the mental capacity for it. Not interested, not interested.
Right.
And it'll stop showing me that stuff.
That's amazing. Self-censorship. I was thinking more like, sounds like a digital detox. You know how like always on Instagram, they're like, "Ooh, this is the latest detox." I'm like, "Girl, your organs work just fine. Like you don't need a detox. That's just pissing away money right there." But what we do need is digital detoxes because I think people don't really they underestimate the power of the stuff that we see and that we take in, that we're actually having thoughts about it, which create that chemical cascade in our body, which is a feeling. And we wonder sometimes why we are anxious, irritated, frustrated, mad. It's because I'm thinking all these thoughts because I'm scrolling on TikTok and I'm seeing a bunch of Karens in Starbucks or whatever. And I get all jacked up about it. It's like, I don't need that in my life. I have enough
Yeah.
things going on. And so like setting that boundary for ourselves to protect our own thoughts and feelings. I mean, I don't know any other better way to say it, but I love the self-censorship. I'm going to totally use that.
It's an opportunity because here's the thing, and you really hit on this already with saying like that it creates these cascades of feelings, is that I believe that the things that we consciously consume, and consumption is far greater than um or it extends much farther than just food. But
Yeah.
everything that we consume consciously will subconsciously leave an imprint on us.
Yeah.
And a lot of the attention towards it goes towards the negative, like,
Yeah.
well, if we watch violent things, if we watch things that are, fear mongering, if we do those things, that it's going to impress, us in a negative way. Well, the opposite is true. We can also surround ourselves with empowering moment, positive things, and all those, it really comes down to, do you feel good after watching this? Does seeing
Yes.
someone organize their space like you really, give you a little dopamine hit and really make you feel like, oh, I could do that? Or does it make you feel worse because you
Yeah.
can't do it right now? You're not in a space. Then like what feeds your subconscious in a healthy manner is going to be different than someone else's. And I think that's where the self-censorship gets to come in, and and maybe censorship's not the right word to use, but being selective of what we consume. We don't
Yeah.
put news on in this house. I have to hear it. All that my boyfriend works with federal government branch type stuff. And so he has to hear what's going on all over the nation, sometimes all over the world. We have Weather Channel on.
Right.
That's the extent of it. The Weather Channel. And even that, sometimes I'm like, I don't want to see it. Is it sometimes make me feel bad because I don't want to expose myself to other people's adversities? Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important that we know them, but I think it's also important that we know ourselves, and we know when we're in a space to handle taking that on.
Right.
And so that's my self-care. That's my biggest self-care right now, is to mute the noise and be selective of what I expose myself to.
I love that. I mean, that's probably an area of self-care that I didn't touch on. Because, self-care is not just like getting massages and manicures and pedicures. Like, that is an activity that costs money. Self-care shouldn't cost you any money. And is it really self-care when you're laying on the massage table and your mind is like fixated on like maybe something that you watched on TV? I stopped watching the murder shows because my brain thought I worked for the FBI, and I was always worried and thought all these horrible things about people. I'm like, okay, that has got to stop. Like, it's not helpful for me. I don't feel good. And it's really changed listening to positive things and seeing that I feel like I've completely changed as a person. And then another thing that I heard a life coach say one time is, we do all this consumption, right? We're constantly taking things in. She's like, you need to balance your consumption with your creation.
Ooh, that
because
is good.
I know, right? So like content creators like you and I creating things that other people consume, like it can be kind of a mind fuck at times. It's like, okay, well, I'm creating things that other people are going to consume, but I don't want you to over consume. That's why TikTok, I think, first of all, is so addicting, right? It's so short and so easy to take in, and it feels so productive, but most of the time it's really not, but yeah. Okay. I love that about self-care. That's really amazing. All right. What else? What else did we want to talk about? Do you want to talk about your business, emergency resilience and death notification, or did we talk about it enough? Or you want to talk about what you're working on now? Like,
we could talk about my dissertation,
I
maybe
would
my
love to.
research, maybe see what the implications of that are and where it's going to go.
Yeah.
It's all relative, because eventually I'm going to make some courses and some educational stuff on that. And I think I get real. So I think what you just said too is very enlightening to me, as far as balancing the consumption with the creativity and the creation, because I've been creating a little bit along the way, but my desire to create is so much higher than what I'm actually doing. And I knew I did this on purpose. I knew I had to hyper focus on one thing to get it done on time, because to let some people know, as far as my program goes, I spent 2.5 years in class finishing my doctorate. So this is, you take a class, you write a paper, you read books, you do all that stuff. And then at the end of those 2.5 years of finishing your coursework, you start your dissertation, which is a 2-year research project, which you have up to 6 years, I think, to complete it. And I picked the topic of PTSD and firefighters. So I constantly told myself, I don't have 6 years. Not that I think that my research is going to, you really do start school thinking you're going to change the world with this.
Sure.
And then you're like, no, I'm just going to fucking finish it. And then we'll worry about changing the world. Because when you get caught in thinking it has to be perfect, then it doesn't get done. God.
Perfectionistic thinking. I mean, I think we're all suffer from that. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. Dissertation. Like that's probably words and things that some of us don't even really fully understand. Hey, you know what? I'm sorry. Okay. So talk about the dissertation, but also, now that you say that, I'm really curious what your thoughts are on PTSD, or are you calling it PTSI?
Oh.
I'm very curious. I hear a lot of people throw the PTSD word around, and though I think we do see a lot of things, it is a diagnosis by a doctor, right? And so, yeah, just talk to us about
so that was one of the themes that came up in my research. So
Really?
I'll give you this background real quick, and then we'll
Okay.
talk about how that came up, because that is a very interesting observation, and I really want to talk about that. So the dissertation itself, I knew when I started, I wanted to study something that was going to help progress the options that first responders had. I didn't know what it was going to be. I got, in the time period, ketamine started becoming more popular as a mental health treatment option. Ketamine isn't technically a psychedelic, but it behaves like one, and it has similar benefits to other psychedelics that are not currently legally accessible in most states.
Sure.
So ethically, as much as I would have loved to research psilocybin, which are magic mushrooms, or maybe even ayahuasca, it was just not ethical.
Sure.
To ask first responders to discuss their experience with it. I would have loved to put first responders through ketamine. I was told no. I even had a willing practice that was willing to run them through it. I mean, at a cheaper cost than what it would have cost in my school was absolutely not. I'm like, oh. So then I decided, okay, I'm gonna find, and I did pick firefighters. A lot of people ask, well, why firefighters? Because they have a lot of influence.
Yeah.
Firefighters and police departments have a lot of influence. I don't have any experience with police. I don't have as much of a personal interest. I do have an interest in helping police officers. I think they are a very toxic organization in their own right, just like fire departments have some toxicity they need to work with, and some very deep organizational wounds that need to be healed in order to show up individually with them. But I felt more drawn, and I had more experience with firefighters. I had more of a relative experience that I think needed to be there. And so it wasn't that EMS is inherently excluded from that. My hope is that they will eventually reap the benefits from it, because could you imagine me trying to go to AMR and ask them to discuss progressive mental health treatments when they can't even get basic EAP services down?
I mean, there's a person in management in the company that I work for, when we brought up PTSD, and they're like, EMS paramedics get PTSD?
Oh.
Excuse me, friend, you've been a paramedic for 25 years. What do you mean? I mean, that's what mentality we're dealing with. But the fire department comment, and that they have influence, that is
they do.
Absolutely.
They have organizational and policy all the way up to the state level influence, and they've got national organizations. So they're just a little bit more organized in that sense, and unified in that sense with the IAFF and all that. So that was my choice to do that. So I ended up interviewing union presidents, or union leaders, I should say, because they're not all, there was presidents, vice presidents, directors. And I wanted to interview union leaders from fire departments so they could speak on behalf of their union bodies. So collectively, I interviewed 8 union leaders that spoke on behalf of almost 6,000 firefighters throughout the state of California.
Wow.
And so I felt like, okay, let's talk about the idea of ketamine. Let's talk about the idea of, ketamine assisted psychotherapy, very specific, ketamine assisted psychotherapy for firefighters with PTSD. Let's talk about the perceived benefits, the challenges, the implications, all these different things. Most of them had no idea what ketamine was, as far as, other than those who had it on their units.
Right.
As a medication for pain. It's common in protocol in California to have it for pain. But most just knew that it was, or they heard about it in my little flyer that I sent them. I reached out to almost 60 union leaders, and I got 8 to sign up. They're very busy people, and a lot of my invites went to spam, I was told.
Oh, sure.
So it was fine. 8 was the perfect number. I got exactly the people and exactly the balance that I needed to write this dissertation. So most of them didn't even know ketamine was being used for PTSD, but they were for it.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
they
amazing.
were. And so having some really big conversations that came of it. And if anything, I think that, and this is kind of what's kind of turned into my I guess just my approach with anything is to start a conversation about it. Let's
Mm,
discuss it. Let's get to the bottom of it. Let's not let it create a pulse of its own because we want to pretend it's not happening
right.
over here.
Yeah.
Because there is ketamine assisted psychotherapy in a controlled environment with a clinician, with integrated and follow up talk therapy with a mental health professional. And
Right.
then there's the ketamine that you get um, where you do telehealth. They send you some lozenges or some oral ketamine, and you do pretty much self treatment. That is not CAP. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that
Right.
inherently. I think that it was designed at a time where, especially during COVID, and especially when financial constraints were involved, are always really something that we need to consider. So I appreciate that it's financially more accessible to people. And I appreciate that it's more accessible to people who maybe don't have a ketamine clinic near them. I spoke to a paramedic in, I think, Canada that drives 3 hours for his ketamine treatments.
Sure.
So I do appreciate the accessibility, but there is a lot of abuse that is occurring
Yeah.
in an uncontrolled
Right.
environment. And unfortunately, those testimonies and those reports are getting a lot of noise right now. And guess what it's doing to the
Oh,
CAP?
sure. Yeah.
It's kind of tainting that. So there was a New York Times article that just came out a couple days ago, actually, on this. So all that said, to come back to what PTSD came up. So in speaking to these union leaders, it was kind of a blend. Some of them said PTSD, most of them said PTSD, some use PTSD, PTS interchangeably, some said PTSI. And then after like the third interview, I started actually asking them, do you have a preference for one or the other? And most of them said no.
Oh,
And the
hmm,
ones that didn't say no said, well, I'm trying to make a more concerted effort because it is an injury. We have to look at it as a physical injury. We have to remind ourselves that this isn't something that's going to brand us for life, that's going to make us unfunctional, that makes us unable to do this job. It's just an injury like anything else.
right.
And so in my findings and going back, because sometimes you have to, so you basically take all the interviews and then you have to find what themes come of it, and then you have to kind of formulate it in a response and put it in your chapter 4. There's 5 chapters total, and then sometimes you have to go backwards to your third chapter, which is the literature review of all the study and all the research that you can find to support what's found, and sometimes you have to go back and do that. And so what I did was I started looking into legislature and
Oh,
what the law actually says about PTSD, because in California, PTSD and firefighters is a presumptive injury of the job. As of
interesting.
January of 2020, there's several states that actually have this. And if you look on the IAFF website, they'll actually have a list of all the different states where that is the case. So I focused on California. And in California's law, it actually, in this bill, it actually states that post-traumatic stress was defined something along the lines that I have to go back and read it exactly, but something along the lines is defined as what the DSM-5 defines as PTSD.
Sure.
And they go on to say that it's important that we not use the word disorder to describe something that is an injury that can be healed, to reduce the stigma.
Sure. Yes. That's,
Not only that, I just lost my train of thought. Great.
oh, sorry. It's probably
It's
me.
okay. No, it's okay. It's okay. Oh, this is why. Workers' comp is an injury claim process. This law allowed psychological injury to be covered by workers' comp. So
Mm,
what I essentially not concluded, but I observed was that even though there seemed to be this, and there's another half to this I want to make sure I bring up, but even though there seems to be this kind of um, fluid attitude towards whether we call it PTSD or PTSI or PTS, whatever it might be, getting workers' comp systems to acknowledge psychological injuries as a physical injury, as an injury that is worthy of being treated just like any other torn ACL or whatever it might be, is a challenge of its own. So I see
sure.
why there's a
Right.
push to call it PTSI for legal bureaucratic reasons. Does that make sense?
Yes. 100%. 100%.
Historically, if you look back at what history tells us about rebranding and renaming PTSD, it doesn't change the experience. Whatever you call it doesn't seem to change the experience. And there is research that actually states that it can actually hinder the progression. Because if you look back, what they said is in the last 100 years, and you can trace PTSD back to, what is it? The Mesopotamia. I always say the name wrong, but there was basically there's these ancient civilizations where they have like, hieroglyph. I can't even speak right now, but they have like those paintings on the cave walls of PTSD. Essentially, is what they interpreted this as. This experience is as old as mankind.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they've called it something different, and they've called it something different, and you can see there's experiences of PTSD in Shakespeare and Homer and Odyssey, all these different like Greek mythology, all these things. And you change the name of it. And if you look back in the last 100 years, every time there's been a major war and the repercussions of the war, they renamed what the experience was.
Oh, interesting. I did not know that.
And so there's an argument that there's more important things to worry about than what it's called.
Yes.
Essentially.
Like
and people with a lot more experience. Yes, people with a lot more experience, a lot more clout, a lot more authority on this than me have said this.
Okay.
How I feel about it, I think it's important to be inclusive. So I tend to follow other people's leads. So if I'm speaking to someone that's calling it PTSI if I can observe that they are making a concerted effort to call it PTSI, I'll follow their lead.
Sure.
But I called it PTSD because there was nothing that I don't have a DSM-5 that says anything about PTS or PTSI, so I had to use PTSD.
Right. Okay. That's
I
interesting.
felt like I had to, I guess you could say. But I did have a whole section on it, and I did talk about it, and I did bring attention to it. And I do see the need for calling it an injury when dealing with, like I said, legal bureaucratic type processes. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, 100%. So maybe some people in the audience don't know what the DSM-5 is. Do you want to briefly explain that?
Oh, it's a piece of shit. Like people, most mental health professionals know. Okay, so DSM-5, it's a diagnostic manual, and it's essentially what both mental health, any provider that needs to get their patient medical coverage for their condition has to use the coding and the exact definition and the descriptors in there in order to give their patient access to that healthcare. That's the best way I can describe it. I'm sure there's a better way to describe it by somebody who
I think
actually
that's
has
a
to
great
work
way.
with it.
Yeah.
But it does put people in little boxes.
Yeah.
The thing is, with most mental health conditions that are described in there, you add the human element into it, and now it's a complex, multi-layered, very, very convoluted experience. And so it does not embody the whole human experience. Exactly. And it's limited, right? Because PTSD wasn't even in the DSM 20 years ago. Or I think it was if I remember correctly, it was an anxiety disorder.
Oh, sure.
So it's changed. Even within the DSM, it's changed. And only recently, in the last update, did they include language that include this secondary exposure to repeated trauma that didn't happen to the person, but to happen to people around them, to include first responders.
I was actually going to ask you about that. So I am part of our peer support at the organization that I work for, like not individually with the ambulance service, like it's the whole enterprise. So we have this peer support program, not tailored specifically for EMS, just all like medical providers. And one of the things they talk about in there is second victim stuff. And so for me, I have a hard time kind of wrapping my brain around, so what's the difference between the second victim, like me seeing something or me experiencing? Can I get PTSD from being a secondary victim, like seeing something traumatic, or am I more susceptible to PTSD because I have other mental health issues? Like, how do we untangle all of that? How come some people get PTSD and some people don't? It's just a few
$1,000,000
minor questions.
Just super easy question, Val.
I mean, you wrote a dissertation on the thing. I don't know.
We did not answer this, but I can tell you that when it comes to PTSD, and this is something I want other people to keep in mind, even with my answer, is that a lot of our beliefs around it, even if they are generally accepted beliefs, are just that. They are philosophies, they're working theories, they are not conclusive. It was only 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that I had a very respected mental health professional in my industry tell my audience that PTSD could not be cured, that it was something they would always have. And I was like, no, I don't agree with that. I do not accept that.
Right.
I don't agree with it. And I think they were trying to, um, I think there was a message of power in there, like empowerment of like own it or something like that, but I did not
Oh,
receive it that way.
right.
Okay. So I realized a lot of things are in theory. So what I'm about to say is
Sure.
completely in theory.
Sure.
Um, I think PTSD gets mixed up with moral injury a lot. A lot.
Ooh, that's good.
I think that a lot of times what we are diagnosed with as PTSD because of the secondary traumas that we see in other people is because of our own failures as a provider and our own perceived responsibility in
Mhm.
that patient's demise. That's a very simple way of talking about something very complex. The
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
half of it is, and this part is very inconvenient for legislation and for any type of law or medical coverage for someone that gets PTSD because of the job. I think that our upbringing, our childhoods, and the burdens that we are carrying while walking onto that call is what changes everybody's reaction to it.
Mm.
I think some of us can run a pediatric cardiac arrest and find it to be very like impactful, but then move on with their lives the next day, and other people can't.
Yeah. How
I
do
think,
we
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Go
Sorry.
ahead. No, no, please go ahead.
I'm like, how do we teach people that? I feel like doing this for, I think I'm at 26 years. Um, I've seen a lot, obviously, worked at busy services. And I don't feel like I have PTSD. I think I have some like lingering trauma, like moral injury. But I think as I've gotten older and wiser, like my worldview on things has completely changed from now versus back then. Like I know more now about why sometimes, kids die, or
Mhm.
I don't know, I just am able to process it different. But I wish that we could teach people like in paramedic school, like everybody focuses so much on some things that we just have no
Mhm.
control over. And like, we don't really ever see. It's like, why aren't we talking about how to prevent mental or emotional injuries or moral injuries or getting PTSD or, you know what I mean? Like, how do we,
Because we don't even have the words, we don't even have the language to describe the experience because
ah,
most people don't even know what moral injury is. Most people don't
right.
know the difference between acute stress disorder, PTSD, PTSI, PTS. Like some people think that they're all encompassing, that they're all the same thing. People don't realize that I think that there is a lack of self-awareness and a
Oh,
lack of language to describe it. And
yeah.
what you're touching on reminds me of somebody named, I don't know if you follow Wendy Lund on, she's wealth management. Wealth is in like WELL. Um, this woman is like a fairy godmother. She is a godsend. She's got a lot of experience in this industry. Her social media presence does not do her personality justice at all. And I have
Mm,
told her that she is
yeah.
a fucking firecracker. And her whole thesis, her master's program was in mindfulness for EMS and first
Sure.
responders. So she can speak very well to this and the self regulation
Yeah.
and the mindfulness and the ability to separate and to understand how these things take place and the role that we can play proactively, because it's not a matter of if but when we're going to run that shitty call.
Right. Right.
The variable is how we're going to respond to it. And I would say that I relate to you in that I don't have a PTSD experience specifically from this field, from the work that I did.
Right.
I can think of plenty moral injury.
Yeah.
And I know that I came preloaded with PTSD from my childhood.
Right.
So if I was to have anything happen as a result of work, it was something that it would have been an old injury that was triggered, and it was activated by something that
Right.
happened at work.
Sure.
Something I would say probably the closest experience to it, and this is yet to be studied, and I want it to be studied, especially after the observations that I had in my research, was what is the incidence of PTSD following a work-related injury, like a physical injury, where
Right.
they're off on duty, their whole world is being their routine, their ability to provide for their family, their ability to be the person that they only see themselves as, because there's no separation of self versus work, because you're always on duty, and there's this
Right.
whole like identity that comes with it, and the narcotics, because you're a first responder, so doctors trust you. Here's all the heavy dosing, narcotics that you want, and now
Right.
you're addicted, and now you're compensated. It's so messy, and you're
Wow.
out of sight, out of mind. That's what happened to me with my back injury. I had a total identity crisis. I was in a very depressive state. I couldn't move. I couldn't move my body. So any trauma that I was releasing or I was accumulating from this emotional experience could not be moved out of me. I couldn't work anymore. I couldn't walk. I couldn't bathe myself. I couldn't do anything on my own anymore. And a lot of nightmares started to happen. Nightmares I hadn't had since I was a kid.
Right.
So yeah, old stuff can get activated by new experiences. Being a first responder puts us at much higher risk of being exposed to those experiences,
Yeah.
especially if your life is ever threatened. So being on the side of a freeway, being in a helicopter, being interior on a fire, being in a shootout as a police officer. I have a friend that was stabbed on a call and developed PTSD, understandably so. Get a video of it. Yeah,
Oh
he
gosh.
he's those who have taken my course, he's in my bonus module, Ben, and he talks about his experience with PTSD and how
Oh
he was
man.
one of those toxic men that thought it was all bullshit and suck it up, buttercup, and then he lived it, and now he
Right.
advocates for it and
Mm.
speaks to it. So it's very, very much a hero's journey kind of thing.
Yeah.
The you know type type philosophy, but um I hope I answered your question because I talked so long. I don't
Yeah.
remember what
No,
you asked.
it's perfect. It's perfect. Okay. So you have this dissertation, you interviewed all the union guys. So like what happens next then? So you've created this thing now. What's next for you? What are you working at? What are you going to do?
Well, I think with this dissertation, at the very least, I've created an awareness. I realized that my ambitions to interview firefighters who had gone through ketamine assisted psychotherapy to treat their PTSD, it was crickets. I found nobody. And so I had to pivot my research to speak to union leaders. And I realize now that there's a very great lack of awareness, which creates a very high risk of error, I think, when you don't have that guidance, you don't have that understanding. So I hope that my intention would be to be able to work with fire departments and help bring this education to them, and really any first responder sector that thinks that they can benefit from it, and also teach them how to go about finding a provider that is safe to work with.
That was going to be my next question is how do people find it? Like, do you provide resources? Do you do it? Like, what is?
Not yet. I would love to start vetting. Um, I don't know that it's very practical to say that I can vet
Right.
a practice, but I can teach other people what to ask for.
Yeah.
Personally, uh, I would never go to you can have a fully integrated experience where they know that you need about 30 minutes afterwards to really process the experience. They'll put you in a quiet room. There's coloring books, journals, and there's just a very tranquil experience that's given to you afterwards. And then there's others that are set up like an urgent care, and they pull the sheet, unplug you, bye. There's a
How much
difference.
ketamine are they giving them? Do you know? Do you know what the
It's
dose is?
it's similar to the pain. It's like anywhere between, it could be 0.1, 0.2, 0.5, up to 1 milligram per kilogram. and it's given
Okay.
in an ideal, I shouldn't say ideally, I think it's ideal to give it intravenously, because if they do have a unmanageable trip, you can just stop it.
Right.
You can't take back an IM injection. IM is pretty bioavailable. It's had some good results in research, but you can't take it back.
Right.
So I prefer the idea of IV. Now, here's the interesting part. I've had this conversation with Lindsay, who's the pre-hospitalist. She's got a fantastic platform. If you're not following her, highly recommend it for, remembering all the stuff you forgot since medic school or just never
Right.
learned. She's like paramedic school 2.0 for me.
Yeah.
We talked about this a lot. And the thing is that in medicine, especially pre-hospital and in hospital, having these hallucinations, these visions, these wild experiences, it's considered emergence phenomenon. It's called emergence phenomenon. It's considered an adverse reaction. It is typically counter treated with a benzodiazepine to calm it. In
Right.
psychology, it is the effect. It is the therapeutic effect. It's the desired effect.
Sure.
And with the proper guidance, support, and coaching, you shouldn't have a bad trip.
Right.
Now, can you get too much and get really nauseated and maybe go into what they call a K-hole, where you feel like you're spinning and spinning and spinning? Yes, that can happen. You dial it down, you give them some Zofran, you talk them through it, and all's
Right.
good again. But the difference is, in a mental health setting, that is a controlled environment, that is an environment where they are told what to expect, where they have somebody coaching them through the whole thing. It's not in the middle of a helicopter, middle of the sky in a helicopter, or on the
Right.
freeway in an ambulance, where you're going lights and sirens, where you've got a million other things to get done. Two totally different indications. I'm not suggesting that having a trip with ketamine when you're giving it for pain is an objective. I'm just helping bring some context and clarity to how the medication works and the likelihood of it occurring,
Sure.
because there are like 7 or 9 different types of hallucinations. Visual is only one of them.
Okay. It's all the
Visual,
senses, isn't it? Like,
all of them. Yeah. And then there's what is it, perception, where you literally feel like you're leaving your body, because it's a dissociative. It
right. Yeah.
dissociates your mind body connection. And the healing really happens with, in theory, and I say in theory because we still don't know exactly how ketamine works.
Right.
We have theories, and one of them is that it can actually repair some of the damaged synapses that linger following trauma.
Okay.
On a spiritual level, it integrates the shadow. It allows you to go into the darker parts of the unconscious, of the psyche, and actually explore the parts of the brain that we can't consciously access when we're in a lucid state. It's ego dissolving. And the ego is, in theory, and in psychology and spirituality, it is in theory what divides our ability to access from your conscious state to your unconscious mind. And the best way I've heard this described is, so I've talked to you about this, about my coping mechanism with food, and sometimes in the past it's been unhealthy with alcohol. And I could tell myself, don't overeat this, or stop eating those things, or whatever it might be, or I need to get up every morning and go to the gym, or I something that I could be consciously telling myself I need to do. I need to not get drunk again tonight. I need to drink more water. I need to fill in the blank. Well, if your behavior is being driven by and I say unconscious and subconscious interchangeably, so I apologize for that. But if it's driven by a subconscious programming, meaning maybe you're using it to cope, or maybe it was a maladaptive coping mechanism that served you once in the past that's no longer serving you, it's now causing harm. If it is based in any type of subconscious imprint, influence, programming, then consciously telling yourself not to do it is like yelling at an answering machine to change the outgoing message.
Wow.
Big. So talk therapy and making a goal and, oh, just do what I did, and hearing all these people say how they were able to lose all this weight, they were able to get sober, they were able to quit drugs, they were able to get out of this abusive relationship, they were able to X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Great.
Great.
That doesn't mean it's going to be as easy for the other person,
Right.
because we all have different programming. Now, the way that we get to that subconscious state is through things like meditation,
Yeah.
hypnosis, psychedelic therapy, EMDR.
Yeah. Brain spotting, I'll add, I do that.
I don't know a whole lot about brain spotting, but I'm sure that applies here too. And so I think it's one of those things that we have to realize that just tell yourself, positive things isn't enough.
Right. That toxic positivity. I mean, that's really what it is, because then I feel bad because all these people are doing all these things and they're being so successful. And then I try and do it to myself. And I'm like, what the fuck? Why can't I do it? What's wrong with me? And it's like trying to be that positive person all the time and think you're going to make all these changes without addressing the ego, your subconscious. Wow, that's really mind blowing. I love all of those things. I have not done EMDR, but I've done all the other things, and I do brain spotting, which is founded in EMDR. You should.
I have not done, I did one session of EMDR. I didn't end up continuing with that practitioner. I really wanted to find someone to do EMDR with, but I just kept finding that I either couldn't find somebody, or it didn't work with my insurance or something. They weren't taking new clients, or they were only taking people online, which I was not about at the time. And I just realized, okay, maybe I'm being redirected. Maybe EMDR isn't the path I'm supposed to be on. And the thing is, I would love to do psychedelic therapy, but I told myself I wasn't going to partake in any ceremony and treatment until I finished my dissertation.
Sure.
Because I was walking in biased enough.
Yeah.
As
right.
it was, right? So my goal is to do that once I'm done. But yeah. So anyways, a little observation of mine when it comes to subconscious, unconscious ascent, depending on what psychology lens you're looking through, which philosophy you're looking through, there is a difference between unconscious and subconscious. But in general, I think in the psychology world, we say unconscious and we know what we mean. If you said unconscious in the medical field, what's that going to be implied as?
Right. Yeah.
They're KO'd.
GCS a 3.
Exactly. Or or
whatever.
Not responsive.
Yeah.
So that's where that interchangeable, and I couldn't find anything that specifically said that, but in my observation,
sure,
it's that right there. And I think there's a lot of there's a theory that, and it's founded by some neuroscience, some stats behind it, and I can't remember them exactly without reading my document to tell you, but I wrote a post about it recently, and 90% of our conscious, controllable behaviors are driven by unconscious programming, unconscious thought.
Sure.
So when you stop and look at people who, especially, man, you look at some of the demographics we have a really difficult time finding compassion for: our homeless population, our addictive population, our abusive population.
Yeah. Right.
And I think, the more there's always someone that we draw the line at, that we're like, I don't have any empathy for you.
Right.
But it's ultimately, these are people who were once abused themselves.
Right.
These are people who were raised in very unstable homes. These were people, and it's just, these are very wounded children on the inside. Right. And if they were kids, we would have compassion for them, and we would have an understanding, and we would try and help them. And the thing that it keeps repeating over and over in my head recently after I heard this quote is that something cannot be your fault and still be your responsibility.
Whoa.
Now there's there's potential for that to be toxically applied.
Sure.
In that, just because basically the way I see it is my trauma is not my fault, but my healing is my responsibility. Just because it's someone's responsibility doesn't mean that they all have access to the same support systems, the same care. And I think those of us who have particularly worked in low socioeconomic areas understand, until you've run on a home that has no heat and no electricity, and you've got 9 members sharing a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom house,
Right.
you don't know what struggle is. And we still don't know by observing
Right.
it. You're just aware it's out there.
Right. 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 Wow.
So many things.
Okay. So the responsibility part. So this is really good. I think there's so many possible, is treatments the word I'm looking for? There's so many possible ways for healing. Like, I think we, as medical providers, maybe we get stuck on one and we're like, I tried EMDR, it didn't work for me. Therefore I am unfixable. It's like, I feel like we have to try many different things. We have to be open to the idea that it could be something else that we maybe are skeptical about. So like, what's our responsibility? Where else was I going to go with that? Oh, now I feel like I know what you're going to say, but I'd like to hear your very educated response to it. So should I expect my employer to pay for all of that, or do I pay for it myself out of pocket? How do we empower people to be like, I feel like you got to pay to play. That's kind of one of my philosophies. Like, I pay a lot of money to better myself. And I know that it's not accessible to everybody. I completely understand that. And there's ways probably to get help, but I don't put the sole responsibility on my employer either, because I come with past traumas, I come with things. And so I feel like some of it is my responsibility, and that includes the financial cost of getting treatments. What are your thoughts?
I think it can be both. And I think you're right. I am ultimately going to take responsibility of my healing, and that includes financial responsibility, but I'm also in a place to be able to do that. 10 years ago, I was not.
Right.
10 years ago, I was not. And I can think of plenty of other people who are not in a position right now and won't be anytime soon to do that. So it goes both ways. I think if my mom used to say, beggars can't be choosers. So maybe at the very least, we have some accessibility, even if it's not a lot of options, as far as options within that accessibility. But at the very least, where am I going with this? I'm actually going off track with it. But what I think is important for employers, especially for profit, to understand that if you're going to expect people, not statistics, but people to respond to these vile, repetitive, and it's not just these gruesome calls, it's the redundant bullshit too.
Yes. That's what the public has no idea about right there.
And I hate to say it, because I know that there's this like, well, it's not your emergency, it's theirs. And it's like, yes, and our healthcare system has changed significantly in the last 10 years, in which EMS is being poorly utilized. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I think it's being poorly utilized. And I think that repetitive, going on and on one call, going lights and sirens, getting your adrenaline all pumped up for somebody who's just out of their prescription, which is an unfortunate situation, but there is a missing link somewhere that needs to be filled, right? And it's not with EMS. That's another story. That's another thing. But the thing is, like, here's another thing too, and this is what I wanted to bring up. I'm really squirreling out, so make sure I come back. We like those calls. We went to school for a very long time to run that rip and trauma, to get that cardiac arrest, to deliver that, to do all those things. Yeah. We like those calls. It's once in a while. They don't sit right. Okay?
Yeah. Right.
And I think it's also important for employers to remember that their investment in their people is going to pay off in the long run. They're going to make better decisions on calls. They're not going to call off as much. They're going to present and personify your company, your department, your agency with a little bit more respect and a little bit more pride if you take care of them. Right. One union leader told me that they were advocating for their department, and all these union leaders spoke anonymously. They didn't want, like, some of them didn't care whether they spoke anonymously, but I kept it anonymous just to keep it just add a layer of protection. One department leader had been advocating to had been going to their chief and saying, we need a behavioral health coordinator. We need someone in this position. And they didn't want to do it. And he goes, you've got 4 members that have been off on injury, PTSD injury, for a year and have cost the department $3.7 million. Do you want to spend $100,000 a year on a behavioral health coordinator, or do you want to continue paying for this when it inevitably happens? That's 4 people.
Wow.
In that same year, for a stretch of 7 to 8 months, he said, in that same year, they had 2 to 3 of their firefighters be seen for suicidal ideations per month.
Wow.
Separate from those 4 who were already out on PTSD, would cost the department that much. So it's a matter of asking, should the department invest in SCBA gear? Should the department invest in reflective gear for when they're on the side of a freeway?
Right.
The answer is yes. It's preventative.
Wow. It's
Pay for it now or pay for it later. What do you want to do? And so whether or not they have that childhood trauma, that military trauma, you're now expecting them to go into a high risk environment where they're going to be constantly exposed to other people's trauma. It's going to put them at higher risk of those wounds being activated. And the thing is, this happens to people who had white picket fence upbringings as well.
Sure.
We're all susceptible. It's a human experience. It's a very universal experience. So to an extent, I think it's fair to empower the individual with the responsibility and the opportunity to take care of themselves, and we do so with education and with these conversations and with these resources available. But I think agencies, it would be in their best interest, because they talk money,
right?
Unfortunately,
yeah,
to put these things into place now before they need it, because they're going to need it eventually. And to remember, it's not going to always directly affect everybody. So even though you and I maybe don't have a specific PTSD call, a disruptor that led to a cascade of other issues, it was still important that we be aware of it for the people around us that it did happen to, right?
Right. Yeah.
So
do you think that that's the future of the rebuilding of our industry, is having a mental health person part of their organization or department, or, you know, the ability to have free therapy, any type that I would want? Like, that's just part of the benefit of the job, or being mandated to see somebody every year, or I don't know.
I think the biggest shift is going to happen when the leaders go through therapy themselves.
Yeah. Right. Which
I just think, you know, when we have people, because it's super easy. Okay, so here's going back to one of my red flags with working with a provider is, if let's say somebody is seeking out ketamine therapy, and they go to a mental health facility, clinic, whatever. A lot of these are set up very much like going into a day spa, going into a massage place, like, you know what I mean? Like they've
a
got
wellness clinic or whatever.
Yes, yeah. Very and I hate to use the word clinic, I do it all the time, but very non-clinical looking. Because when I think clinical, I think like an urgent care, and I think of a cold chair and, you know, whatever, no privacy. And those do exist. But I mean like an actual wellness center. If that provider, when you ask them, what is your experience with ketamine? If they say they've never done it, red flag.
Oh,
I'm not working with someone who's never done the medicine, because and again, ketamine's not technically a psychedelic, but it behaves like one. So we are finding the benefits of it. And it is a Schedule 3 right there with testosterone. And we know how many firefighters and cops are in testosterone. Okay. Well, it's not that inaccessible legal wise, right?
okay.
If in a traditional psychedelic practice, shamanic practice, it is customary that the healer takes the medicine, that the healer has a personal relationship with the medicine, to the point where the healer would sometimes take some with the people that they're healing, but that's not necessarily going to be the case in this situation. We're talking like, ayahuasca retreats in the jungle of Costa Rica, perhaps with traditional behavior, but they should understand what I'm going to experience when I go into this psychedelic space and healing.
Right.
What healing have they done? What work have they done? And so I do believe, this is kind of a relative point, but not the same, but I do believe that any agency, organization that wants to lead a mental health initiative better have experience using those resources themselves.
Yeah.
It would completely change the dynamic.
Right.
And then if they go through it, they'll know how frustrating it can be sometimes.
Right. Right. I mean, it's the same thing with going to therapy and seeing a therapist, that has no experience in EMS or the pre-hospital world, and they get so hung up on one thing. And I've been to therapy a zillion times over a variety of things. And it's like, listen, lady, this is not about my schedule right now. Okay. Yes, it's a nightmare. Stop agreeing with me. Like, I want to talk to you about how I'm feeling about this call that I had. And they can't wrap their brain around it because they're just like, wait a minute, you don't get a break? Wait, you didn't get lunch? Like all these things. And so I'm always wrestling with this idea, like, do the best mental health professionals for our industry, should they have some level of experience or awareness or knowledge, intimate knowledge of what we do and how, I don't know, what we see. They can't wrap their brain around it, in my experience. Now, I've always gone through EAP. So these are places that my employer has decided that I should go. And I suppose I could look into, it myself. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think it can go both ways.
Yeah.
I have worked with a mental health professional who was a cop years ago, like in another lifetime years ago.
Yeah.
Like this was not the forefront of her personality by any means. And then worked in dispatch. After that, like 20 years prior to us working together, I think. And I've also worked with a mental health professional, psychologist, who had zero experience with first responders, hadn't even worked with a first responder before.
Sure.
But she learned so quick.
Oh, that's good. That's a smart one. That's a good one then.
She learned so quick, and she eventually became a sought after psychologist for first responders because she had enough clientele that were first responders that she knew what epinephrine was. She knew what a cardiac arrest was. She knew what a TC was. She just learned.
Right.
She just wrote it down. And she asked questions that weren't impeding of my treatment. Does that make sense?
Yes, 100%.
She goes, TC, traffic collision yet? Okay, good. Like, just quick note about it, quick blur. And so there comes a degree where we have to not be so, and I'm not saying you're doing this because I'm talking to me too, but we have to not be so, we can kind of be a little bit of an elitist bunch of people. Or like, oh, you don't get it.
Right? Oh my gosh, yes.
As if being a psychologist for 30 years, like this woman had, doesn't come with a degree of wisdom and experience, right? But do I think working with somebody that has experience and knowledge of first responders is ideal? Absolutely.
Sure. Doesn't
come without flaws. Yeah. Doesn't come without its own limitations because there are only so many of them. So what happens is you actually get, you have someone that is in theory available, but their schedule is completely booked up.
Right. Yeah, that's
which
the truth.
Sucks. Can we teach clinicians to be more understanding of first responder culture? And I say yes. I actually did this with my friend Ben. My neighbor at the time when I lived in California, she was the not CEO, but she was like the top dog at this practice. She's a MFT, a marriage family therapist, and she was top dog at this practice, and she trauma specialist, EMDR, and she handpicked all the individuals in her practice that she felt had the personality to work with first responders. Now, she wasn't a first responder, but her sister and I worked together for the same company for years. She was very familiar with the first responder world.
Sure.
And she knew how crass we could be.
Yeah.
And just how stupid our personalities could be sometimes, how like
Yeah.
our sense of humor. And so she handpicked these individuals. And then when they got a contract with a large fire agency to be available for their employee assistance programs, for their internal programs that they offered. And Ben and I got in there and we gave a great lecture and we had a fun time and we laughed with them and we explained certain things to them so that they weren't going in completely blind
Right.
to what it's like working with a first responder and what it's like what our hesitations are with working with a clinician.
Right.
So I think they can be taught.
That's, you're right though about our attitude about it. It's like I'm some special snowflake. There's no possible way she could understand. But that's my own, like, I have to check myself at,
There's
kind of.
truth to it.
I mean,
there is truth to
yeah.
it. There is truth that, but we do like going to CPAs that work with first responders. We like going, I mean, how many times have I asked for a recommendation for, oh, I needed something done with my car and I put it out there and they're like, oh, go to so-and-so. He works with a bunch of firefighters, works with a bunch of cops. We naturally feel like we can trust someone when they have that, but that's the association. That's where our ego says, is this safe because it's like, and there's limitations to that, but I think we can work with it. I think we can work with it and also understand that sometimes we have to go, like I said, my therapist that I was working with, she had 30 years experience in trauma.
Right.
Do I really think she can't learn a thing or two here?
Right. And isn't that why I'm here? Like, I have trauma. I need to talk about it. She might know more than me. I mean, most people know more than me. So what I usually
and
think.
So I think it's a balance. I think it's a balancing act. And I think there's room for both. But I think ultimately, especially post-COVID, we have such a need. We have such a need for clinicians, for first responders. We have such a need for clinicians, period. In fact, there was something that came out and I made a comment on it, but I don't like politicians, period. I'm very politically homeless. That's probably the most you'll get me to talk about politics publicly. But I remember, I think it was Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, had this initiative. He had a huge bill that was going to help first responders in their, I don't know if it was education or training or something like that, that was essentially going to give them secondary training of like, I don't know. I'm botching this completely. It was my insurance guy that tagged me in it in like Twitter. And then of course, people like fighting off on it. But I threw it out there and I recommended it. I said, you know what we could use? We could use some post-educational support on training first responders with an interest to become therapists.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
That
Why
would
don't
be
you
great.
take first responders who have PTSD, that no longer want to work in this field, that are treating their own wounds, that are doing their own healing and working with someone else, to then learn how to turn around and still be involved with first responders.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be like an amazing, like there's an opportunity for that. Not everyone's going to want to do it. Not everyone should do it. But to have that opportunity to repurpose, it's kind of like almost a post-traumatic growth thing, to be able to take your wound and heal it. I mean, that's the heroes, the wounded hero archetype, is that the best healers are the ones who, what's the word I'm looking for? They're good at what they do, not in the absence of a wound, but because of it.
Ooh, yeah.
Which is the exact opposite of the narrative that we tell ourselves, that when we're broken, we can't help others. And the opposite is actually true. But there's a process that has to occur in the post-traumatic growth and the healing that has to occur to get ourselves there.
Well, that's a good reminder for me to talk about post-traumatic growth on the podcast at some point. I like that. I had another coach tell me one time, she says, when these adversities happen, you have two choices, very simplified, of course, right? It can either make you bitter or it can make you better. Like, which one are you going to choose?
Depends on the day.
I know. I'm like, better most of the time. Hope make me better, right? I don't know about making anything else better, but I say that to myself a lot. Like, am I going to be bitter about this, or is it going to make me better at doing whatever I'm trying to do? I don't know. Something to think about. Okay, let's see. I had a note. Video games. Have you heard about a way to prevent PTSD by playing a video game after Tetris. Yes.
So somebody on my Instagram actually emailed me this and said, "Hey, have you heard about this?" And I have a whole folder. I have a whole folder on my desktop that's Tetris. And I dragged like probably, I think I found 8 studies on it, and I just
Yeah.
haven't gotten around to looking at it because I'm very fascinated by this. What do
It's
you know about it? You
fascinating.
probably know more than I do because they just gave me a little tip on it and I haven't dove into it yet.
I don't remember I don't remember how I learned about it. There's a gal who does a TED Talk, and she was like, she's
Ooh,
a neuro person,
I
and
want to watch that.
yeah, it's really good. I'll send you the link. I'll post the link in the show notes for this. How about that too?
Okay.
And that there's, it's the brain chemistry. Like you see something bad. If you play a Tetris game and I think has a lot to do with maybe some EMDR stuff, right? Your eye movement and desensitizing and trying to do something prevents those neural pathways from connecting for the trauma. Like a lot of the senses, like how you'll hear people say like, oh, I smelled that, right? Like when I smell a fire, I don't think of a campfire, right? Like a lot of people maybe do. That is not the memory that comes whoosh right back to my head, right? It's the traumatic burn patients that I've taken care of that's what that memory is completely associated with. So I just found it fascinating. So whenever I'm able to tell people, I'm like, hey, get Tetris on your phone or Candy Crush or something. And if you have a really shitty call, like, listen, you know that you're going to play the game anyways, just like try and take a break on your drive back. Or I always like to hide out in the bathroom because nobody bugs you when you go to the bathroom. It's like, I got to go to the bathroom. And then I just sit there. I'm like, what the fuck just happened?
Well, I wonder what it does to our ability to process that memory, because I know that there is a connection between the sleep that we get, and particularly the REM sleep that we get following a traumatic
Yes.
event. And what happens? We go home and we drink. If we
Yes.
go home, we drink. If not, we're up all night running calls, or
Right.
something happens. Like the best thing we can do for ourselves, and it's also the hardest thing to do for ourselves following a
Right.
traumatic event, is sleep.
Yeah.
And I want to also draw attention to the fact that what we deem as traumatic, or what we deem as like just routine, our bodies might not.
Right.
So this is a pattern. This is anecdotal observation. It doesn't mean it's been founded, but I would love somebody to study it and actually quantify it. The number of people that have told me all of a sudden, this is 20 years towards the end of their careers or halfway through it, let's say they either had a significant call with a pediatric. I had one guy reach out to me after a really, really disgusting call. And I had somebody else reach out after they just started waking up with nightmares.
Mm.
They said, I started recalling these patients I completely forgot about, that did not bother me when they
Oh.
happened, that I never thought I had issues with until they started revisiting me today.
Oh shit.
So, so how do we then discern what's a potentially activating call and respond to it accordingly now, even if we're not bothered by it? I
Right.
don't know. So could just taking 5 minutes to play this game, because that's what they did in one of the studies that I
Right.
did have a chance to look at, is they intervened with actual patients in an ER that had been in a motor vehicle accident and said,
Yeah.
are you wanting to be part of the study? Here, play this game.
Yeah.
And I just, I love things that are backed by research, but I think some things we just have to, what's the risk?
Well,
What's the risk
that's
in doing it?
exactly it. Right.
No, nobody's saying don't go see a therapist. Nobody's saying don't, whatever, like do this on your own. But if you could potentially offset the way that this is stored or not stored, right? Because I think it's the
Right.
hippocampus that is responsible for our long-term memory,
Yeah.
and the REM sleep. What happens in REM? Our eyes go back and forth. I kind of, and I might be wrong in this because I'm not EMDR specialist, but I'm almost under the impression that EMDR is almost like a manual REM. It goes back in there and it
Yeah.
stores something away in the right place where it wasn't stored prior to.
Yeah. That's
So
fascinating.
I wonder how it affects that, but I'm going to have to dive into that now that you brought it up.
Yeah. You're 100% right. Like it might not be super like randomized, controlled trial studied, but like, listen, if it helps you, I mean, what's the harm in playing Tetris? We all know that we play games, and the worst thing that we can do, and this is really hard to get through to people, I think, as well, because we all have such challenging relationships with alcohol, is that, and I cringe every time I see somebody make a post about, they're like, oh, I had a super hard day, like, and then they, have a picture of, a half bottle of whiskey, though I enjoy whiskey, like, and bourbon, like anybody else does. It is not the best method to help ourselves. I would argue that it makes things significantly worse because it does disrupt our sleep, and sleep is my big soapbox that I think everybody, I want to shout out to the rooftops to everybody. It's like, you need to sleep, my friends.
Sleep hygiene,
Yeah.
I thought was a stupid thing to invest time and advocacy into. Like, I thought, who's going to pay attention to that? Like, none of us sleep. No one's going to pay attention. And I remember doing a list, like a survey of like, what things do you find the most valuable? And the number of people that want more information on sleep hygiene blew me away, because I was one of those people that have been like, pass. And I'm like, oh, I'm definitely, that's why it's so important to do inventory and to actually survey your people. And I would say every agency, if you're not surveying your people, then you have no idea what they want.
Oh my gosh. Right. And not like the survey on how the organization is doing. Like,
ask how they're doing, and make it a safe place for them to do it. Right. But anyways,
my gosh,
yeah. And so the sleep thing, and gosh, what was I going to say with that? The alcohol thing. Alcohol, I've come to understand, is a very effective coping mechanism, but it's maladaptive. So after so much time, it's going to create more problems than it's going to solve. Does it help you numb the pain? Yeah.
Yes.
But it also numbs the joy.
Yes.
It numbs the joy. It numbs the hope. It numbs the clarity to see past the pain. It numbs everything. It's not selective. And the number of people I've spoken to who don't drink anymore because of the place that they went mentally.
Right.
It's profound.
Yeah.
It's really, and I admire it. And I drink a lot less than I used to.
Yeah.
I drink a lot less than I used to. And part of that is because I don't think I'm in as activating of an environment. I have a lot more control of my environment now.
Sure.
And this might segue into another area. I started tracking my blood glucose.
Oh, right.
Guess what the hell happens every time I drink?
I did not know that either.
Drops. Last night. Okay, so I did have a couple beers last night. Michelob's. Shit's like water, right? It's got like it barely any carbs. So I don't know. It's just a super light beer. My freaking alarm went off twice last night, waking me up because my blood sugar dropped below 50.
Wow.
This is when and so this feedback, this device telling me how my body was responding to certain foods, certain substances, influenced, do I want to really fuck up my sleep tonight?
Yeah,
right. And I started saying no. So a few months ago, when I first started tracking it, I was taking a flight out of here to California. It was like a 7 p.m. flight. I'd already eaten, and I had either a whiskey or a old fashioned. I had two. I had one on the first leg, one on the second leg. Get to California, still feeling pretty buzzed, and got a Uber, took me back to my sister's house where my car stays when I'm there. And all night my alarm kept going off, and it's one of those continuous glucose, so it's not like you can just take it off or turn it off. I'd have to turn my whole phone off, which would have shut my alarm off.
Right. Yeah.
And so all night it's going off, it's going off, it's going off. I wake up in the morning, still it's in the red, and I'm like, of course I feel sluggish, I feel like shit, don't feel the best.
Right.
I eat a piece of toast. It's all the thing I have, like, no protein whatsoever.
Right.
I had a piece of sourdough. Blood sugar still doesn't go up. And finally, at like 11 a.m., my blood glucose comes up. So 12 hours later, it finally clears my system enough to restore my blood glucose. And guess what? It was all over the place for the next 3 days.
Right. And completely disrupting your sleep and making you
totally
feel like
disrupted. And this is actually why we get the drunk munchies. It's compensating for the drop in blood sugar. And then all of a sudden we want to eat something, because here is where I think blood sugar falls under an subconscious influence on our conscious behavior.
Yes.
We're not going to reach for the chicken and broccoli when our blood sugar is dropping into the 50s. We're going to reach for that cheesy pizza that's super easy to get by the slice around the corner from the bar that we're at.
Yeah. The brain is so smart. It knows the quickest way to get glucose to feed itself. It's like, what is the fastest thing? Doritos? Yep. Yes, please.
Yep. It's not going to crave protein. That's going to take too much work.
Yes. Right.
Right. And so I think that that's why we do the things that we do. Sometimes are influenced by our chemistry, our hormones, and glucose and insulin and all that all counts.
Right. And we think we're just kind of feeling hungover. It's like you're feeling your blood sugar being low and your body's trying to work to get past it. It didn't get the sleep it needs. So alcohol disrupts REM sleep. And as the night progresses, your body tries to compensate as the alcohol burns off. Then your body tries to compensate by saying, okay, we're going to stay in REM longer. And then if you wake up during REM, because we have no control over like when our alarm goes off, if we know what stage of sleep that we're in, and then we could all of a sudden wake up in stage 4, stage 3, and now we feel sleep inertia, which can last up to 45 minutes, which is that groggy feeling. This stuff I could just nerd out on forever. So it's like biofeedback. And I think people in our industry, healthcare people, really, that can be super beneficial. Like actually seeing what alcohol and other foods does to my body, I can like pick up the message a little bit better. Maybe like, oh, I see. Like if you don't know, you're just like, I don't know. I feel like shit.
You just think you're hungover. And then the behaviors from those choices then drive other subsequent behaviors that aren't necessarily. Now, is it my responsibility to now go, do I really want to drink this now? Is drinking on an empty stomach in my best interest? Is drinking this late on a night that I have to go to work the next day in my best interest?
Right.
Is drinking after that really nasty complex call we had really in my best interest? Probably not. Probably not. And so it's just those little things. And I think, like you said, it's a form of biofeedback. And one of the biggest lies I think is told is that unless you're a diabetic, you cannot benefit from watching your blood sugar. And I call complete bullshit. I have so much. I will die on this hill because, and there are studies to show that. I think they said 80 some percent. There was one study that was shared by the Glucose Goddess. I love her content. And informative. Oh, you've got to follow her. She's great. She's French. And so you have to find that. You have to find the account. You have to find the account that's in English.
Okay.
Yeah. But she basically shared that 80 some percent of people with that are non-diabetic and type 2 diabetic particularly still fell out of range of blood sugar at some point. And so people go, oh, well, if you're, don't have a history of diabetes, your blood sugar stays normal all the time. Bullshit. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. And if you're insulin resistant and all these other things that come into play, I mean, that affects weight.
Oh my gosh,
how quickly we gain weight. So two people with completely different chemistries are going to respond to that meal differently.
Right.
And I think some of the best advice I got from my doctor when I went to her and I said, hey, I'm starting to get really concerned about, my midsection. I'm gaining a lot of weight here. More than ever. This is more than just stress. This is more than just a few bad habits. Like this is just keeps going up. My A1C keeps going up. My cholesterol keeps getting out of whack. Like I'm going to be 40 soon. Like I need to start, reeling this in. She goes, well, do you have a glucometer? My insurance actually offered me a glucometer for free. I didn't have diabetes.
Really?
No. Most of the times you can get a glucometer because we are so at risk of becoming type 2 diabetics in this country.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the type 2 diabetes is at 42.9%.
Yeah. And it's supposed to, there's a really damning statistic for 2030, 2040 when it comes to diabetes. And I'm like, nope, I'm not going to be part of that. I'm not going to be part of that. And so using my glucometer to at the very least, and some people get caught up on the ranges because there's really no prescribed range. But I noticed that if my blood sugar is over 100 when I wake up in the morning and it's over 100 consistently, I've got a problem. I also know that being under stress and before my cycle starts, it'll creep over 100 as well. It's not just food. It's not just food that's affecting my blood glucose. And I also realized that when I'm looking at the trend, is my blood sugar looking like a fine V fib, or is it looking like chaotic you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
is it
yeah.
going up and down, up and down, up and down? I'm just trying to stabilize it. I just want it to stay stable.
Right.
And I'll actually show you what it looks like right now, because it'll show you that little dip from
Oh
my
yeah.
beer.
Yeah, right?
Not
Isn't
my
that
best.
wild?
Not my best.
I have so many thoughts and questions. So I remember realizing my dad had type 2 diabetes, and he's like, yeah, I can't really drink alcohol anymore because it totally tanks my blood sugar. And I remember thinking, wait, I thought alcohol would increase it. Like, alcohol is fermented, right? Fruit, or generally grain or corn or whatever it is. And like, that's concentrated, which that's sugar, right? And I would think that it makes it go up, but it goes down is like wild to me. So then my question is, so when you are stressed, like you have a stressful response, does your glucose goes up with cortisol, right? I mean, like, does your sugar go up?
I
You
don't know
don't
if
really,
that's why it does. Do you understand why our blood sugar drops when we drink alcohol?
I don't think I do.
It's because our body perceives it as a poison, and it will prioritize burning alcohol. So alcohol has its own like not macronutrient. I don't know what the right word is. I'm not a nutritionist, but like alcohol has its own grams, measurement
Okay.
in grams. Okay. It will halt all other so everything that we eat gets metabolized by the liver.
Yep.
The alcohol gets first rights because the liver wants to metabolize the poison out of our body first and foremost. So it'll put everything else off.
Oh, wow. Wild.
Now,
That's wild.
when it actually metabolizes this food, I don't understand. Okay.
Yeah.
I think it does it later or something like I don't know that part. That's a little too deep for me. But taking consideration this, I remember when I was baby EMT, there was a woman at the hospital who had accidentally ingested antifreeze.
Okay. Yep.
And it was a genuine accident. It was, if I remember correctly, it was one of the city had a big marathon or a big race thing, and some guy was, pouring these like Gatorades into little cups and handing them out. Well, then somebody had some whatever coolant or whatever in the back of this old beater truck and grabbed it thinking it was just he had coolant in a Gatorade bottle. And somebody poured it, handed it to her. She drank it,
Oh my
spit
God.
most of it out, but she drank the antifreeze, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So at the hospital, they prescribed vodka for
Yeah.
her.
That is the antidote for antifreeze is
And it's
alcohol.
the antidote because it occupies the liver with something more toxic than antifreeze so your body can process it in the meantime.
Stop it.
That's how I
Stop.
understand. I might be wrong.
No,
I'm
you're
willing to be
not wrong.
corrected
That's
on
not,
this, but I'm pretty sure that that's exactly how the body perceives. It will actually rank alcohol higher. So my partner at the time,
oh my gosh.
he was a tech in the hospital, and he said that they went and got vodka from the
Yeah.
pharmacy, and they were giving, you go into like the trauma shack and get those little juice cups, the little orange juice and cranberries.
Yeah.
They were mixing her up
Yeah.
all these cocktails and getting her drunk because there was
Taking
a certain
mocktails.
amount yeah.
Oh my
They're
gosh.
giving her they were like literally her little bartenders because she had to ingest a certain amount
Yeah.
until her body could process the antifreeze and it not affect her liver.
Actual.
And we glorify alcohol,
I know.
and we sell it, and like I consume alcohol. Okay, I'm
I do
not
too.
saying
Yeah.
that, you know what I mean. And I think
Yeah.
that's why a lot of people don't like talking about alcohol
Yeah.
because we are still consumers of it. But but when someone wants to tell me that psychedelics are harmful and that they're addictive and that we need to do this, and I'm like, there is literally no known benefits of alcohol.
Right.
Absolutely none. The whole thing about the antioxidants is horseshit.
Horse shit. I agree
It's
100%.
old, weak data that has been repeated over and over again to help us justify it. And I'm not saying you need to stop. I'm just
Right.
saying be aware of
Yeah.
our stigmas and biases towards our biases or the stories we tell ourselves about other things or concepts or
Right.
people. Be aware of our perceptions and our biases towards certain alternative medicines when the thing that, like, how much does society impact your belief systems
Oh my gosh. Right.
because of marketing? right?
Marketing. I know, let's preach this all the time. It's like, who's talking about the caffeine addiction or the sugar addiction or I was at Starbucks this morning with a friend.
Coffee.
Coffee, number one. I think it's the number one addictive. Caffeine is the number one addictive substance abused. I don't know what, I mean, I drink it. I have a complex relationship with alcohol as well. I think it really affects my weight, quite personally, disrupts my sleep. Here's the other thing though about alcohol, which reminds me, like we're talking about disassociating. Have you seen the movie The Matrix?
Yeah, my boyfriend made me watch it.
I'm a big fan of that movie because I think drinking alcohol is like plugging into the Matrix, right? We're not really living our reality. We're in this different thing because we're trying to block that negative feeling because we get reward system, right, from dopamine by drinking alcohol, because we're trying to avoid the negative feelings that we have. But your emotions, your feelings will always wait for you. We have to process
Yes.
them. We have to
Yes.
process them. And for women, we're seen as we are more emotional than men. I think it's proven that I think we are more emotional than men. We just process it differently. And I think that there's no coincidence. Is that how I want to say it? That like sometimes we're looked down upon for being women in this industry because we're not physically strong enough. And that our weakness is that we're emotional. And I think our strength is that we are emotional, because I feel like I'm much better at processing my emotions than building and holding them in. And maybe that's a societal thing. Like men are told like not to express emotions and stuff like that. But I think that that's detrimental for our industry. So then when we don't want to experience our emotions and then we use alcohol or gaming or pornography or any of these false type pleasures to not think about our emotions, we have net negative consequences. But at the end of the day, you still have to process the emotion. We have to process the shitty stuff that we see and that we experience. And then of course, learning how to do that is challenging because I don't know, it just feels uncomfortable. People don't want to do it.
Are we more emotional, or is it more accepted that we are emotional?
Yeah. It's probably we're more accepted. Like we're the caregivers, like we're seen as like, that's how we're portrayed as women, right? The more caring of the two. I mean, and we're just talking in black and white gender, I suppose here, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah. And I think one thing that has really helped me, and this is just my personal philosophy, is I
yeah.
look at masculine and feminine. Masculine and
Oh,
feminine,
yeah,
it
yeah.
shows up in any gender, and we
Yeah.
all have a degree of one or the other. And I think that the masculine is they're considered the warrior, the provider, the fighter, and
Mm-hmm.
the feminine is the nurturer, the caregiver, the giving that emotional space. I think
Yeah.
that there's some truth to that without being black and white with it, because
Yeah.
I have a lot of masculine
I do too.
traits
Yeah.
naturally. Even before I
Mm-hmm.
got into this field just perpetuated it more.
Yeah. I
My
agree.
my self-work includes integrating the feminine and not viewing the feminine as weak, but the
Right.
strength
Yes.
that goes with the feminine,
Yeah.
and that the emotions that come, the variety of emotions that come with my feminine experience can feel very intimidating. They can be very scary. It can be very vulnerable. It can be perceived as weak from
Yeah.
myself and others, when in reality, there are no good or bad emotions. They are
Right.
all to be experienced. Like you just said, emotions will wait for you.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, so it reminded me of this quote by Carl Jung, and I looked it up just to make sure I didn't get it wrong. But a lot of times when we repress those emotions and they get embedded in the unconscious, they kind of take up a pulse of their own. They kind of take
Yeah.
up on a life force of their own. And there's a quote that says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
Yes. Wow.
Talk about integrating the shit that we like to push down and we like
Yeah.
to suppress, and or it was oppressed in us when we were younger or
Right.
in a vulnerable state. I mean, it's not about only having good emotions. It's about acknowledging and experiencing all of them. And another great account I love is the holistic psychologist. And she recently said, anger isn't a negative emotion to experience. It's what we do in reactionary to that anger that
Right.
can be harmful.
Right.
But
Yes.
especially, and I will say that society does tell women not to be angry,
Yeah.
especially women of color not to be angry.
Yes.
But anger is actually an indicator that our boundaries were violated by somebody else. Anger is
Yes.
a good indicator for us. It tells us things. We shouldn't feel shame for feeling angry. We should use discernment with what we do with that anger, right?
Right.
But there's a difference. And I think, we're taught to be, I think one of the best movies anybody could watch is Inside Out. It's a Pixar
Oh, yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I watched it being so annoyed with sadness because she was such a damper. Like she just ruined everything she touched.
Right.
It was like, just sit there, be
Yeah.
quiet, don't meddle with anything. And she was everywhere because, and I mean, everybody has their own interpretation of this movie to an extent, but
Yeah.
I found that what did I have you seen the movie? Have you seen
Yeah.
the
Yep.
whole thing? At the end of it, joy could not get rid of sadness because there was no joy without sadness.
Okay. So now we're going into uncharted territory here. I don't talk about this very often, but so this coach that I've had for a number of years, she believes in this philosophy that life is 50-50, 50% good, 50% bad, black and white. The duality is always there because we cannot have joy without sadness. So your life can be considered 50-50, your day, your hour, a freaking minute. Right? It's like we have to embrace and acknowledge that there is negativity in the world. That doesn't mean that we like it, but we have to experience it because without the contrast, without this opposite, we can't experience the other. And it's not bad to have negative feelings, or I don't even know. It's like it's not good or bad. Maybe how it feels in our body is right. Like
two things. I'm
okay.
going to interject before I forget. I'm going to interrupt you, and I'm sorry.
Yeah.
MLK has a very famous quote that says, "Only with the darkness can you see the stars." I'm gonna botch that actually.
Yeah.
Oh no, he says it. Only in the darkness can you see the stars.
Yes.
Martin Luther King said that. Another thing, and it's a line out of Hamlet. "'Tis nothing good nor bad, but thinking makes it so."
Yes. Just read that not that long ago.
Did you? It's one of my
Yes.
favorite quotes. It's so true. And so it's our projection of that experience that makes it good or bad. I'm a crier. I cry all the time. And my boyfriend gets very uncomfortable with it because he has to look at
Sure.
me and like, are these sad tears or are these happy tears? And it doesn't matter if I'm premenopausal, not premenopausal, PMS, like premenstrual symptoms or postmenstrual symptoms. It doesn't matter what cycle I'm on. I'm a Pisces too, and a lot
Okay.
of people don't realize that I'm a Pisces, but Pisces are very emotional beings. And he's like, it's Pisces season. Like I'm crying all the time. Last night I cried like 3 times watching one episode of Ted Lasso, and he's like, "Are these happy tears or these sad tears?" I'm like, "They're just tears.
There's just
It's just
tears.
emotion moving." And
Yeah.
I was somebody that hid that for so long. And now I'm not hiding that for the first time in my life. And this poor guy is like, "Why are you crying again?" He doesn't
Oh my
understand.
gosh.
He's learning that they're just tears. I'm not always upset. Sometimes I'm
Right.
just moved. And for the first time in my life, I'm in a relationship that I'm safe enough to do that with.
Right. Right.
So yeah.
And it's like, can we have safe enough relationships with our coworkers, with our
Oh,
peers? You know what I
sorry.
mean?
Oh no.
I know. Like that's part of, I think, why we hold on to some of these emotions. We're trying to portray ourselves in a certain way. Like I'm sure you've done research or I heard you mention like the shadow, like the different fronts or the different selves that we put forward facing to people, like
The persona, yeah.
the persona. And it's like, how is that negatively affecting us as well? Because we don't feel safe. We don't want people to see or perceive our weaknesses, like that we can't handle that. And so then we stuff it down and we avoid it. And then have you read the book, The Body Keeps Score?
Oh yeah. Bessel van der Kolk. He's actually
Yeah.
one of the people that flat out does not, he says that he's one of the ones that's not in favor of changing PTSD.
Yes. Okay. Interesting. I read the book or I listened to it. I don't really physically
I
read
listened to it as well. I think it's an important lesson for
it. Yeah.
anybody.
I think it was really good. And then, did you read or listen to the book, What Happened to You? The one with Oprah
Mm,
Winfrey and what's
I don't think so. That one I
Perry,
have not.
Dr. Perry. It's very
Dr.
good.
Perry. Okay. Or is it You're Not What Happened to You? Is that the name of the book?
No, I think it's What Happened to You.
Okay. I have not listened to that one yet, and I haven't listened to any of Gabor Mate's book, who is another just amazing trauma specialist in that industry, along with
Oh, I'll have to check
Bessel
that
van
one
der
out.
Kolk.
Okay, yeah, those are good. Oh, okay. Wow. This is
So
good
yeah,
stuff.
no, I hope so. And I would say, and I jokingly said, no, it's not safe around your coworkers,
Right.
but we need to find the people that are safe to be around. And there is somebody I absolutely despised in school said something that I think was very true. So I have to give them that. And he says that if everywhere is a safe space, nowhere is a safe space. And I
Mm,
think that there's some value in saying that not not everybody can be trusted. But
right,
what's harmful is when you have nobody you can trust,
right,
when you have nobody you can turn to. There was a study that just got published on first responders, firefighters particularly, but it talked about dispatchers and EMS in there as well. So I don't know why it was titled that. But firefighters and I'm sorry, moral injury. And it made a comment about the correlation, granted it's just correlation, but it's still
right.
something to observe, the correlation of suicide in firefighters and lack of home, like something going on at home, like they were either going through a divorce or they were
Yeah,
going through something significant. And I don't want to, I'll say with a disclaimer of, I can't remember exactly what the line said, but it alluded
right.
to that. And so when you don't have at least one person in your life, that support system is everything. And that is something our
Yes,
employers cannot provide for us. Now, do our
right.
employers have influence in the way that they show up for us following a traumatic experience or something
Yes.
significant? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
But it's a holistic approach. It's not
right,
just on us. It's not just on our employers. It's not just on our people at home. It's all encompassing.
right.
Makes it even more
Okay.
complex.
Final thing, because we could talk forever. Okay, so the final thing is because you brought this up and it's making me think of it. So I have a fairly non-traditional thought process behind burnout. And so what you said about the suicide because of like what's going on in their home life, I think
Mhm.
that has everything to do with burnout as well. Because I feel like if you don't have a safe space, like the people that I see that are the most burnt out do have things probably going on in their home life, whether or not they talk openly about it or not. Because it's crazy to me that several of us can do the exact same job. And how come some people are burnt out and others aren't? And it's because we're all different individuals and we all have different experiences in our home lives and everything because they combine, right? That's why I hate the work-life balance. I don't believe that there is a balance. I don't think that we want balance because like, I think it's all different things. This is a topic for another day, but I'm just curious, like what, if when you were doing some of your research and stuff, if burnout comes up, if it is somehow related to PTSD and kind of what your quick and dirty thoughts are. That doesn't
Um,
sound right. Quick and dirty thoughts,
Quick
quick
and
and
dirty
dirty
thoughts. Burnout did
about
not
burnout.
burnout did not come up a lot, but I was also not looking at it.
Sure.
So it's not that it wasn't implied, it's not that it isn't related. But the focus of the interview questions didn't go to burnout. I know that a couple of the guys did say that the staffing issues did increase
Yeah.
some challenges, some complexities.
Yeah.
So yes, I also believe that it what affects the first responder at work absolutely impacts the other spouse, whether they work or not,
Right.
whether they have kids or not. It affects the household, and
Yeah.
that becomes very challenging. And I know several career firefighters who are leaving the service because it's just too much on their families.
Yeah.
Some of them have kids, some of them don't, but it's very interesting to observe that in I'm at the point where I've got friends who have made it to the captain rank, who have been in this field for 15 plus years, who 15, 20 years, who are now going, yeah, I'm a good 20 years from retirement, but I'm done.
Wow.
So I don't know that that answers your question.
Yeah.
um but I think burnout is a whole other that's a whole other topic that I think I would love to explore.
Right.
And I think that yeah, it just gets even more complex. But I do believe that burnout does contribute to, I do believe that there's a relationship. What that relationship is, I can't say. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't really know either. It's just, you hear a lot about it, and like, there's a lot of things like staffing, like that is out of employees' control. It's like, I don't have control over that. And I don't, employers, it's all about the money. So they don't really mind too much if we're, feeling, and I would say that with my age and wisdom, like I don't feel the pressure to continue to pick up hours to help with their lack of staffing. And that probably is, yeah, I'm not sure how to think about that either,
There's so many things I would love to fix,
I
and I
know.
have no idea where to start. It's just sometimes
Right.
I get very overwhelmed by it too.
Yeah. Right.
And I think all we can do is our little part with it. And I think honestly that the best thing that we can do to improve our system is to improve ourselves. That's the only thing we actually have control over.
Thank you. We are soulmates, because my favorite quote since high school was like, change yourself first, then the world.
I'm pretty sure that's based off a Mother Teresa quote.
Is
Says
it?
if
I
you
have
want to
no
change
idea.
the world, go home and change yourself, or go home and no. I'm sorry, that's not. But there is something similar that she said. If you want to change the world, go home and love your family, or something like that. But
Right.
it really comes back to the internal space and like what you're showing up and projecting to the world, and how you're like, we literally have so many initiatives and advocacy and activism, and understandably with very important topics, but you're not going to push others. You can only change yourself.
Right. We cannot listen. If, if there was a way to control people, I would have controlled my children and my dogs and my spouse a long time ago. They are uncontrollable. I cannot control them. I can only control myself. That's the only power that I have. And I think the sooner we all realize that, the more we can turn things internally to fix ourselves. And then those other things, it's not that they don't matter, but they kind of fall off to the background a little bit, and they're less of a concern. And so we get less jacked up or spun up about it, because we're just busy working on the insides here. Always work to be done.
Yeah.
Not
There you
that
go.
it's not important. Well, thank
Exactly.
you so much for being my first guest. I'll probably break this into a couple of podcasts, would be my guess.
Fine.
1 or 2 or whatever.
We covered a lot.
We did. It was amazing. For sure going to have you back on. How can people get in touch with you and find out your work and follow you? Tell us all the things.
The best is probably I'm the most active on Instagram. I love the community there. I'm on Twitter, Facebook. I have a TikTok I haven't really used, but I think you'll get the most of me on Instagram and emergency resilience. Website is available as well. Like I said, I do have one course available. It's a 3-hour CE course that I offer for $39. And it is the first of many that are going to come. There's actually some additions that I'm going to put into that CE course. The price will not change. The CEs available will. And when that update comes out, anybody who's already purchased it will have access to it when that happens. But again, everything's on hold until I finish my degree, which hopefully will be at the end of, I will defend soon. I'll defend my dissertation soon, probably in the next month and a half, and then I will graduate in May. And my goal is just to continue pushing that envelope, creating more, like I want to be able to create education that is beneficial, not only for people to understand, but also to get a CE from it, because you have to get CEs anyways, right?
Yes.
And then just include things like everything we talked about today. I want to find a way to make a CE out of it so that it has its purpose.
Yes, because that's the problem, like I want to speak on things that are not traditional continuing ed hours. I know physicians do it. I know that they can go to conferences on burnout and well-being, and they're getting continuing ed hours somehow. I don't know if it's under miscellaneous or administrative.
We'll do it. We'll make it happen for you.
Right? We have to make it happen, because people need to know these things, especially if you want to be a career paramedic, career EMT, firefighter. Like, it's not just like you just show up to work 36 hours plus a week. I don't know. It's a lot more.
We all have something to contribute, and this will be a whole other segment that we can talk about at another time. But being able to teach really does change your relationship with the field. And it also allows you to leave it better than the way you found it. There's a whole whole thing we can talk about another time for it, but
We'll get all the educating ladies together.
all
I see
right.
the dudes get together all the time. Why not the ladies?
Right.
Oh, by the
Yeah.
way, Alex might be coming. Fingers crossed. She can work it into her schedule to come to the second annual All EMS Women Retreat in Wisconsin.
Yes, I am.
That
That's the
is
plan.
October 12th. You'll probably drive here. You don't live that far
Yeah.
away from me.
We'll see. Yeah.
It's less than
We'll
a day.
definitely talk all those details. I think I
Yeah.
have it in my calendar so we can confirm all that
It
when
would
we
be
get
amazing.
offline.
People will be like, "Oh my gosh, Alex is going to be there." Will we be calling you like Dr. Alex? Is that going to be your official
Please
title?
don't.
Like-
Please don't. Alex is fine.
Dr.
It'll say Alex.
You're so humble. So humble. Well, you have an amazing day. Thank you so much for being here. I really, really, really appreciate you and all the value you put into the world. And I'm just so glad to know you.
I had so much fun. Thank you for having me, Val.
Thank you. We'll talk to you later.
Okay. Bye.
Let me figure out how to stop recording this.
Ears hurt.